to them, it was a game. It was a game. They had programmed themselves to play this game.
They call themselves the trench coat mafia, I guess, so they sound tough and nobody will mess around with them. And I guess yesterday was their day to show everybody.
This can't be happening to our school.
I know, we don't.
I don't know.
I just started screaming and crying and telling him not to shoot me. And so he shot the girl. She shot her in the head in front of me. And he shot the black kid because he was black. And he shot him in the face.
Maybe to them this whole thing was play acting. You know, the problem is there's no reset button on Columbine, April the 20th.
April 20th was just another day at school for me. I mean, it started out normal. I was just going to classes and just a typical day. My 5th hour class is my choir class, which is where I was that day at 11:20 when everything started.
I had 2 children in Columbine. I had Rachel, who was a junior, and Craig, who was a sophomore. And so that day, we did a lot of play acting and kidding, and one of the things that we did a lot of was role reversal, where they would take on the attitude of the parent, and I would be the child or the teenager. And one of the last things Rachel said to me was, Mom, I'm just not going to be able to take care of you anymore. And, you know, not having any idea that that really was going to be the actual truth.
My day started out just the typical job of a homemaker. I was just cleaning the house.
Where are the people?
It was really strange because we heard noises coming from the cafeteria, and you don't normally hear noise coming into a choir room because it's kind of a soundproof room. But we still didn't think anything. We still weren't that worried. And then we saw kids running past the door. And then everyone was a little bit tense. We weren't sure what was going on. And then a kid walked in and said, "There's a guy with a gun." About half the students in the classroom left immediately. They ran out the door, and the other half of us that stayed in there, we kind of got down on our knees. You know, we were kind of just trying to figure out what was going on. I remember I immediately grabbed a girl a couple rows behind me, and I started to pray with her because we still weren't sure what was going on. We heard all this noise, we saw screaming, but you really don't know what's going on. Your mind hasn't come to understand it yet. And the gunshots, you could hear there were gunshots, were getting closer at that point.
We all got under the desk, and then they just started coming in the library and opening fire and shooting off bombs. The 2 guys were around, and they were shooting people left and right.
Screaming after they'd shoot up something, they'd go, "Woo!" Just a pleasure for them. That's all it is.
So many people.
I made it to the top of the stairs. more people were just coming up, and so I turned around and went the other way with the rest of the kids, and I ended up in a science office. The two teachers in the room that were with us huddled over us, and one of them being a Christian and one of them not being a Christian, he started praying that if a life had to be taken or that if someone had to get shot, that it would be him or one of the teachers, so that these kids could still have a chance to know Jesus and know Christ, which just made me start crying because I almost just felt how lucky I really was, you know, to have known him and him before I was in a situation like this.
You could almost sense, the good and the evil in there, just kind of butting heads. You'd never in your wildest dreams think about anything like that, like for real, and it was real.
It was the scariest thing I've ever seen. You could hear policemen just coming from all directions. I mean, ambulances everywhere, fire trucks. There were like 7 helicopters in the sky, and they had a tank there from the National Guard. The SWAT team was there.
Finally, when they were, within 5-10 feet of us, right on the table right behind us, and I looked back and I could see both their faces of them sit. They had set some of their stuff down on the table, and for some reason just decided that they needed to go reload on ammo, and walked out the main entrance to the library, and that's when I just got up and I yelled, everybody get out. Everybody that got out at the time when the rush of people got out of the library, there was no one else. All the people that were in there, except for Patrick Ireland, there was no one else alive in there at the time. And he got out, minutes later out of the window.
Go ahead and disregard the chase. We got him.
We went outside and the SWAT was there and they took us out, and basically they just told us to run for our lives. We were searched on the fence first, and they searched us because we were all treated as suspects because they weren't sure, what was going on.
None of us knew how big it was, We weren't sure how big it was, and the first indication that this was something completely serious was when we ran out of the school. One of the first things we saw was Rachel Scott, and she was just dead. One of the girls that got killed was just lying there dead as we ran past. And it was almost like shock. You couldn't believe what you just run past, and you knew she wasn't alive because they weren't trying to help her or anything. She was obviously dead. I remember seeing Rachel Scott's mother coming into the elementary school, and I had just seen Rachel Scott dead coming out of the school, and I saw her coming in saying, have you seen Rachel? Has anyone seen my daughter Rachel? And my heart just sunk because I knew that I'd seen Rachel dead, and I wasn't about to be the one to tell her,
Meanwhile, Craig, who escaped out of the library, called me on somebody's cellular phone out in the parking lots, and he said, Mom, I got out, Mom. And he said, I'm praying with other students who still have brothers or sisters somewhere in the school, and I'm praying with them. He said, but Mom, I can't find Rachel. And he said, I'm really worried about Rachel.
Or when I heard about the Columbine incident, I was at church here, and we were about 2 miles from Columbine. So I jumped in my truck and I ran down there. And then about 30 minutes after I was there, a couple of kids from our youth group came running out, and they said, you're not going to believe this Isaiah, who was the Afro-American student. He said he was shot. He was shot 9 times. I heard another girl run out and say that she had heard a young lady asked the question, do you believe in God? She said yes, and the young girl said, and they killed her. Those are the first two stories that I heard when I went over there.
The officials asked us to fill out missing persons report. And that's when I began to feel the hopelessness of Rachel's return. They said, there's nothing more information we are going to give you tonight.
So we're just sitting waiting for any word that would come, from the sheriff's office or whatever. And the sheriff's deputy came around and talked to each of the groups and mentioned that, most of the bloodshed was in the library. And of course, when Doreen heard that she was pretty sure that John was dead. This was sometime in the evening, and by that time, John was the type of person that if there was any possible way, if there would have been any possible way, he would have called. And we pretty much knew that he was dead.
Your brother will be okay. Where is my brother?
Nick, don't know where you are. Hold on. Nick, listen for 1 second, okay? Your brother?
He's my twin, man. He's my twin.
They're gonna find him, right? No.
The first thing that ran through my head obviously was just a list of names. I thought of my brother, I thought of Seth and Crystal and Sarah, I thought of Cassie because I knew she was always in the library, And I remember Cassie's parents were sitting on the grass, and along with some other families and stuff like that, and that hadn't found their kids yet. And I just, I remember my dad taking me, and he just said that, sorry, he just said, I think you need to understand that the families that are going to Leawood right now are the ones that will more than likely lose their daughter or son, their sons and daughters, And I said, what do you mean? No, I think you just have to come to terms with what God might have wanted to happen today.
Cassie Bernal was one of the victims in the library, and when the gunman came into the library and started shooting people, she was singled out. According to the witnesses that were around her, she was singled out, and they asked her if she believed in God, and she simply said yes, and they shot her. One of the first things that went through my head when I found out that Cassie had died, why couldn't I have died instead of her? I kept saying that to myself, why her? Why does this have to happen to her? Why couldn't I have been where she was?
Jesus was on this earth, he said, look guys, I've done some great miracles, but when I leave, you're gonna do even greater things. Jesus fed 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But Cassie fed the world with one word, yes.
It was almost at that point, I was able to start celebrating her life and not just mourning her death, but saying, because I was starting to see how her life served such a purpose. And so many people saw that she represented her life with Christ in such a cool way, that I started to see, wow, God really can use this. He can really even use her death to be a good thing, a positive thing. And it still hurts, but we had a video during her funeral just kind of showing clips from her, showing pictures of her from her life, and there was a testimony she gave at our youth group like 2 nights before, just about how she was doing in her relationship with God, and just hearing that was so reassuring.
I think that the way I'm advancing the kingdom is just being a loyal friend and a good example to non-believers and also Christians. Just trying to not contradict myself and get rid of all hypocrisy and just to live for Christ.
It's 2 days before she died, and so we think that that was pretty prophetic that actually happened. When I first met Cassie, her parents brought her to our church. She was totally into witchcraft. Her parents found journals and writings. They found some detailed drawings of Cassie, who had done some drawings of killing her parents, disemboweling them, hanging them in a closet. Cassie was really in trouble. She was a troubled young girl. And we decided that maybe she should quit school. The parents should take her home, and Misty should quit her job. And so the parents did that. They quit their job, they cut the phone cords. I mean, they did some radical things. But they believe because of that, they in fact saved their daughter. But also what they did is they made her come to church. And about 6 or 8 months after she came to this church, through other friends, she finally became a Christian. She received Christ. And a big change happened in her life. Even her brother said that the darkness that was in her, you could see the darkness in her eyes, was no longer there. She was a brand new person. And she trusted God up to the last second of her life. When they put a gun against her head, it was a contact wound. It was the gun was literally sitting against her skull. And they said, "Do you believe in God?" And when she said yes, he said, "Why?" and blew her head off.
I think that when you hit a certain point in your life and where you're faced with death, for me anyway, when you come so close, you brush death. It's like, well, am I doing everything? Am I ready to go? You know, am I ready to leave this earth? And is everything going to be okay after? You know, and I just think that I really take my faith very seriously now. And I know that Christ means business with us when he says that we're his children, we are his children. But I think that, I don't know, I just think that we have to act like it, you know?
John drove his truck to school every day, and after that happened, we probably didn't go to the memorial for at least 2 days. And then, of course, when we went down to the memorial, John's truck was a part of it, and some of his friends had taken care of it, and it was covered with flowers and stuff when we got there.
This is John, our son. This was his girlfriend, and this is his best friend who accepted Jesus Christ the day after John died. About 3 weeks after John's death, we hadn't done the Spurgeon devotional because of spending 2 weeks at memorial services and a house full of people. But one day I walked in and John had picked up that devotional again, and he just happened to turn to April 20th because we hadn't done the April 20th on that day. And he said, "Just look at this." And it was a morning and evening devotional. And the morning devotional was about child of God, how sweet it is to die in the Lord. And I just cried through it. And then the evening devotional was fighting the Lord's battles.
It was put there, you know, by God for us on that day. And it's just a lot of things like that just confirm, you know, that God is still with us, still helping us through it, and by his grace we'll get through it. And when we see joyful things like that happen, then we rejoice, and when we're have moments of pain and silence, then we cry.
Rachel was one of the very first that took a shot. Actually, she suffered 3 gunshot wounds. We understand through a surviving victim who was with Rachel that she was asked if she believed in God. After she already had 3 gunshot wounds that she had taken, she answered that she did, and then the shooters said, then go be with him. And then they shot her through the temple, which of course was instant death. Rachel had shared a photography class with the 2 shooters, Eric and Dylan, and they had turned in that violence video that had gotten so much attention at first, where they had actually videoed almost a play acting of the Columbine massacre. And at the same time, Rachel turned in a photograph assignment. This is Rachel's actual hand. She writes this: "What if you were to die today? What would happen to you? Where would you go? Tomorrow is not a promise, but a chance. It may not be there for you. After death, then what? Where will you spend your eternity? Will you have an eternal life with our Lord, with our loving Father, or will you be ripped from the arms of your Savior, Jesus Christ? Eternity is in your hands. Change it." One of the last poems that Rachel wrote was written in April of '99, and she writes, "I'm drowning in my own lake of despair. I'm choking, my hands wrapped around my neck. I'm dying. Quickly my soul leaves, slowly my body withers. It isn't suicide. I consider it homicide. The world you have created has led to my death." There's no reason for a young 17-year-old happy girl to write something like this, except that I believe she knew what it was like to sense the hopelessness of the world that she lived in the darkness of that world, and the fact that there was a battle of good and evil going on, and that it was all around her.
I think what happened to Eric and Dylan that did all the shooting started as something really small. A comment somebody may have given to them in passing about them being different or not fitting in, something small, but that grew, and they didn't let that out in any way, so it just grew inside, and it grew inside, and they became more angry and more vengeful towards these people, that they started thinking, oh gosh, what if I could just get rid of those people?
It's like playing a video game, that video game the boys played called Doom. They played that so much, you know, that it's integrated into their emotions and how they think and how they do, and maybe to them this whole thing was play acting. You know, the problem is there's no reset button on Columbine, April the 20th.
The boys in Littleton were obsessed with violent video games, in particular the game Doom. Doom is used by the United States Marine Corps as a tactical training device. These boys took Doom and designed scenarios that were structured like their neighborhood, and I'm told by the Denver Post reporter, they actually made a Doom scenario that was their school. And then they turned off the ability of the people you kill to fire back. They put themselves in what's called the God mode, and they went into the game and they rehearsed the act of going through their school and gunning down the people in that school. In Taber, Canada, there was a copycat crime to Littleton. There was a boy who was obsessed with the fame that the kids in Littleton got. But the boy had not played the violent video games, and he had not seen the violent movies. He had not been desensitized to human death and suffering. So when he shot his first victim, he went on to begin to wound another, and all of a sudden he stopped. He was stunned with the real blood, the real suffering, the real horror. And he was frozen, as any human being should be. But the boys in Littleton had something he didn't. They had played and played and played the video games. They had the conditioned response to kill, kill, kill. and they had watched the horrendously violent movies and been desensitized to human death and suffering, so they were able to blow one little kid's face off after another, and never pause, never hesitate, never do anything but laugh and mock and cheer as they do it.
Maybe their music made them, you know, a little more upset, or maybe video games said, oh, this is how you can kill someone, but that wasn't the real problem. The real problem is I think they had been so hurt in their heart. And if we look at all these things on the outside that these guys did or were involved in, and never look at what was going on inside of them, all the pain, you never get anywhere. Because I think with Eric and Dylan, it's very easy to say, well, they had this and that and this and that, and that was all wrong, and never take any responsibility and say, well, maybe we never treated them the way we should have treated them.
I had to come to terms with what happened, and I realized that if I were to not forgive, if you keep the hate inside your heart against Eric and Dylan, it's going to be no different than the hate they had against everyone else. Hate is hate, you know. They hated people enough to go crazy on us, and I just can't let that brew. And I know that if you don't forgive people, the bitterness sits inside you, and it steams and it steams, and finally you just let it out, and who knows how it's going to come out. And I know that if you forgive and give it over to God, then He'll make everything new. And He did. He really did.
On May 2nd of 1998, she wrote an entry that said, "This will be my last year, Lord. I have gotten what I can. Thank you." Somehow, the Lord prepared Rachel for an early death. And it was like her young life was here for a season, for a purpose, and then it was taken so that that purpose could be fulfilled. And that's real hard as a mother to say, Lord, I give you my child in order to fulfill your will on this earth. But I would have to take away from God's sovereignty to say anything less, because I do believe in the sovereignty of the Lord. As a mother, it just cost me my child. So I have very mixed feelings, although I know it's good. It's good. It's just that it's hard.